Studio Ghibli's final film and Miyazaki's crowning achievement, The Boy and the Heron, is out in US theaters. And I'm gonna say, if you haven't seen this movie, do yourself a favor, see it in theaters, even IMAX, because the animation, the visuals are exquisite. And beyond that, a majestic, moving story. It is an amazing film, but this is not going to be a review video. Instead, I'm going to be speaking to those of you who have seen the film with full spoilers today, unpacking some of the hidden meanings, because, as you know, although this is an amazing film, it can also, for some viewers, be a little bit troubling and violent and confusing and odd and grotesque. So I want to really go into what some of these images and symbols that Miyazaki's delivering here are actually attempting to portray, at least from my perspective, and this only scratches the surface, but let's just get right into it. So I'm going to start off with the first one being the initial threshold crossing. As they leave Tokyo, Mahito arrives at the estate and he sees the heron for the first time. So this is the traditional monomythic crossing of the threshold vibes here. The descent from the material world into the spiritual world. If you haven't heard or looked into the hero's journey or the monomyth too much, check it out. There's videos on YouTube. Maureen Murdoch offers the heroine's journey. Also very compelling, but I'm not going to go deep into it. What it does suggest, though, just to bring it right from Campbell's words, the crossing of the first threshold is with the personification of his destiny to guide and aid him. The hero goes forward in his adventure until he comes to the threshold guardian at the entrance to the zone of magnified power. Such custodians bound the world in 4 directions. So, as we see the heron for the first time, we know that we're jumping between worlds here. There's Tokyo versus the provincial estate. We go on to see this is the material world versus the spiritual world, adulthood versus childhood, the mundane versus the magical world, and we actually go through a number of threshold crossings in this film. Oftentimes you'll see the heron depicted above the archway or the threshold. Each time Mahito crosses these thresholds, he descends further into magic. At the estate, we also see the power of nature. We're just given by Miyazaki a number of almost minutes of footage without a lot of dialogue, where you're just being engrossed and absorbed, as Mahito is for the first time, in nature. In Japan, oftentimes aesthetically what they attempt to deliver is something called mono no aware. Mono no aware is an aesthetic philosophy. It speaks to the sadness and the power of the fleeting impermanence of the natural world. Very kind of bittersweet feeling. Joe Hisaishi's original soundtrack that accompanies the film, underscoring it, delivers on this feeling to the nth degree. And we really just see the estate suffused with this magical natural world's power. The next big symbol we see is the Wizard's Tower. After Mahito spends a little bit of time in nature at the estate, he notices the tower in the distance and the musical tone changes instantly. Wizard's Tower is a legendary archetype, obviously Lord of the Rings, Stardew Valley, shout out. I could go on. But it goes back to the Middle Ages, when the kings and queens of Europe, the nobility, would reserve the tallest tower in their castle for their court astrologer, who would often be appointed as, a pivotal functional member of the court, and thereby would divine sort of the stars for the king and queen. The highest tower, of course, puts them closest to the stars. And yes, we then do see the great-granduncle figure later represented as an astrologer once our eyes finally catch him silhouetted against a backdrop of celestial stars and constellations there. So, beyond that, the Wizard's Tower is often depicted as the Blasted Tower, or the Broken Tower. And this comes from the Major Arcana of the Tarot. It's the 16th card of the Major Arcana. Has a lot of divinatory symbols attached to it therein and thereby. And by the end of the film, we do in fact see the tower in its final blasted form. And it's a symbol of not only a destruction of the old order, but of renewal. And, I think great-granduncle's wish for Mahito to go on and create his own world of his own design without malice is an powerful, incredible wish for the audience and for Mahito. And that is in fact what Miyazaki is doing with this film, is delivering it as a gift. The Wizard's Tower also, we are told, straddles many worlds. Not only the material world in which Mahito encounters it, but we see the underworld that he descends into, and the celestial world. So this gives us what we often call in mysticism the triple world, or the three-layer world. This is the underworld, the deep, the land of the soul, the material world, Earth, that we live on as humans, and then the celestial world, the heavens, typically. And in most forms of asceticism, shamanism, esotericism, the three world is united by an axis, a central world tree or a world axis. And in fact, the kanji, or the character for king, a king is one who is the axis between the three worlds, the truly powerful individual, or one who travels the three worlds. So I thought that was pretty cool. The spiral stairway is also part of the tower. When Mahito first goes into the tower, all he can see is the first few steps of the spiral stairway. This is a major symbol of the initiatory path, or the magical path. Because unlike a linear stairway where you can see every step and what awaits you at the top, with a spiral stairway, you cannot. You can only ever see what's ahead of you about 2 or 3 steps ahead, no matter whether you're at the bottom or anywhere on the stairway. Similarly, you can only see what's two or three steps behind you. So it really is depicting the descent into the unknown, a big move into the magical world that, you go into this like Socrates, knowing only that you know nothing. You don't know what awaits you here. Beyond that, with the Wizard's Tower, is the inscription over the archway. I'm sure a lot of you caught this. Facemi la divina potestate is Italian. Obviously an inscription, presumably put on there by great-grandfather, but it means I am made of divine power. I am made of divine power. We don't know if Granduncle's talking about himself, about the estate, about the tower, or about what awaits you within the tower once you go inside, but I think it's an incredible affirmation. I want to spend a moment on the Meiji Restoration. We're told that the tower falls from the heavens shortly before the Meiji Restoration, and this is a historical event more than a symbol. What they're speaking about is effectively kind of post-US Civil War, a series of governmental, civil, military, social reforms that the Japanese emperor enacted in order to seize or restore power from the military leader, the shogun, who had ruled Japan for centuries prior to that. And by doing so, by instating these reforms, this is like 1868, 1870s, so relatively recent in modern history. It is what transformed Japan from a feudal society into a more modern society that we know it as today. So to say that this arrived before the Meiji Restoration and then the great-granduncle began to work on the tower, build the tower afterwards, it effectively tells us that this tower also straddles 2 major points in time temporally, and it also speaks to the eccentricity of the great-granduncle characters. Because keep in mind, historically Japan was closed off to foreign powers for 2.5 centuries prior to this. So for, Japan to be opened up again, books to become accessible, great-granduncle, enamored as he was with Western powers and Western knowledge and everything, you can see it in the architecture, everything about his world, the estate, the manor, it's a big leap into modernity. Great-granduncle was quite an odd guy. He's quite an outsider. He's not your normal man of his times, necessarily. So, yeah. Another quick note about agricultural volunteers, a scene pretty early in the film where Mahito is supposedly going to school, and then, after the scene, after the wounding, Mahito's father, Shuichi, pulls him out of school. Have a little compassion for the father here. It's not just that he's being ignorant, thinking that, these other boys hurt him. It's that he doesn't want his son doing hard labor, because at this point in time in World War II, all of the men have basically been conscripted into military service, or as we see with father's factory workers, conscripted into industrial service for the military. So in the lack of, men who would otherwise be doing this farm agricultural labor, the children who are made through their education and the education officials to fill in doing this hard labor. So what the father's doing here is really stopping his son from doing hard labor. So in case you didn't catch, I don't know, maybe you guys caught that, I don't know. Anyways, have a little sympathy for dad here. So yeah, speaking of this kind of scene, this part of the film, Mahito gets into a fight within the first minute of meeting his peers, and afterwards self-harms. He wounds himself with a pretty significant head wound, and this scene elicited the biggest emotional, visceral reaction out of the theater when I was seeing it. And in case you've never seen a head wound bleed, do know that they do bleed profusely as compared with other wounds of the body. So it's not, Miyazaki's depiction is not excessive. But what's really going on here is after this, and you know, as the viewer, you could also be like, well, now that he's hit himself in the head, isn't he just like isn't he like does he have a concussion here? Like, maybe, because after this, the movie takes a distinct turn toward the weird. But what I feel is actually happening here is the initial wounding on the shamanic path of what initially creates a shaman, or the quote-unquote wounded healer. Often in global shamanic societies, the shaman is the individual who, either from birth or early on or somehow along the path of life, endures an actual significant physical or mental wounding, self-inflicted or not. Oftentimes it's, you know, individuals who are blind or deaf, seriously, or schizophrenic. But in such a wounding, for the shaman, the wound becomes the power through which the magical world enters into you, and it becomes the source of how you can become what's called the wounded healer, effectively. This is, I believe, the true beginning of Mahito's move onto the magical path, and we do see this, in fact, as the other beings around him come to call him, in fact, the long-awaited one. So the long-awaited one couldn't have necessarily been without that wound. That's my hypothesis. Yeah, that's what else I was going to say. Think of like the Fisher King of Parsifal, for example. Here's kind of what this symbol harkens back to in a lot of classical literature. Okay, let's talk about the heron. The heron is the mentor guide. But we have to respect Miyazaki here, because typically in a lot of fantasy, you know, folk tales, fables, proverbs, the mentor guide is oftentimes like an old male wizard, an enlightened being, or a powerful being, a magical being. Heron has some power, but you know, he's not necessarily great-granduncle. Great-granduncle is who we would think would be the guide mentor, but instead we get the heron, who is sort of the assigned guide by the powerful wizard. This doesn't detract from what he represents. Again, if you want to read more about the symbol, hero's journey, mentor, discovery of the mentor. So we have to respect Miyazaki also for depicting Heron as he is. He is another aspect of Miyazaki's personality. Just as great-granduncle is Miyazaki, a facet of him, so is the Heron. Also, so is the father, Shuichi. Also is Mahito. There are 4 generations depicting different sides of Miyazaki, in my opinion. But this Heron character is crude and vulgar, and he's deceptive. He's a deceiver, a liar. You know. So it's interesting that Mahito still grows. He still learns. Although he is not a wizard, the Heron, he is a wise man. He's a wise individual that, you know, typically you have to become an old man to get this sort of learned, you know, live and you learn, common sense, street wisdom that the Heron does, in fact, possess. And I think this is just kind of the hard knocks wisdom that Miyazaki picked up over the years. As in classical Japanese art, the Heron is often depicted as a solitary, lonely figure, in an individual solitary state, often in a wintry scene. So I think this is Miyazaki depicting the quote-unquote winter of his life and his retirement, which a lot of this film speaks to. So while we're at it, father, Shuichi. He is the modern man. He also straddles two worlds, pre- and post-war Japan. He straddles East and West in being simultaneously nationalist while also dressing in fine Western garb, which we see Natsuko also adopts by the end of the film. I would say, he's the man of his time, another aspect of Miyazaki's personality. And in this guy's, he is the tower, a paragon to a child. The child sees their father as the role model of how to live, how do you live, and the symbol of what Mahito will himself grow into. Yeah, I actually found myself resonating with the father character quite a bit. Mahito too, but as a new father myself, as of a couple months ago, I have recently discovered within myself the similar feeling that I would also cross heaven, earth, and hell to save my child. So yeah, and while we're kind of on the point, let's just speak to the blood and the shit and there's a lot of grossness in this film, right? Miyazaki does not shy away from that, and as a new father, that has also been my experience. Life is full of shit and blood. Shit happens, and by the time you're Miyazaki's age, you've certainly seen quite a bit of it, and it doesn't really just faze you as much anymore. So I think that's actually what Miyazaki's kind of trying to depict with this viscera, all the guts spilling out, it's the visceral nature of life. It's part of it. You can't ignore it. You can't suppress it. Better to just depict it. Okay, so I saw the film subbed, and there is the oide kudasai, the join us scene. I understand this really shook Japanese audiences quite a bit, but the speaking carp and the frogs, it simply means please join us. Frogs and carp are somewhat legendary, not holy, but revered animals in Mahayana Buddhist cultures. So there is the Longmen myth of China, in which the carp, after several failed attempts, finally swimming upstream, leaps over the dragon's gate. Carp leaps over the dragon's gate, and in one swift instant transforms into a dragon. So a bit of Magikarp into Gyarados vibes here, yes. But similarly, the frogs are somewhat, revered animals in Buddhism, specifically Zen, which is a prominent strain in a lot of, provinces of Japan, because of his ability to meditate. The frog will sit there and sit calmly for hours waiting for his dinner, just in stillness and silence and meditation. So, Buddhist monks have a fondness in their hearts for frogs, and definitely some Haruki Murakami vibes, as he uses a similar employment of the same symbol in a lot of his texts. All right, next is the power of books. Because we learn that great-granduncle was enamored with books, obsessed, and a half unfinished book was really all that he left after he disappeared one day. And shortly after this, we discover that, along with Mahito, after he knocks some books, a gift that Mahito received from his mother that he'd forgotten about back in 1937, which was a copy of How Do You Live? A book which was itself given to Miyazaki by his mother. We see that in the film as well. Mahito instantly goes on to, without actually seeing anything about this book, he goes on to read this book immediately, tearing up, growing through it. I mean, it's a powerful book. I do have another video about this book, not necessarily a review video either, but the book and the movie don't have a ton to do with each other. They do carry a similar message. They leave you with a similar feeling, I guess, but it's simply the inspiration for The Boy and the Heron. It's not The Boy and the Heron. So I do want to be clear on that. But I'll also shout out the local mangaka, who has a great video that he also just released that goes kind of deeper into Miyazaki's ties with this. Check those videos out here. But what I wanted to say about this is similarly that when Natsuko goes into the forest and Mahiro has to attempt to go find her, he leaves the book half unfinished, which I think is also an important nod from Miyazaki, that, you can't learn everything from books. At a certain point, how do you live? You just gotta go out and live, really. So, yeah, check out those videos. While we're at it, I guess also, if you've been enjoying this video, tell me what you think. Obviously, am I wrong? Am I way off base here? Has this been valuable to you? Because let me know down below. I do intend to do some additional videos in a similar vein to this rather than the generic booktube content. So yeah, long story short, would love to hear any feedback from you guys. So moving along, the rose. The first time we actually see the silhouette of great-granduncle up above at the top of the tower is after he drops a glass rose and it shatters on the ground. The rose, I believe here to be the symbol of the esoteric, the magical mystery school that great-granduncle would have likely belonged to and maybe even been trained in somewhat at this time through his studies, his readings, the Rosicrucian Order, or the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross, an ancient secret society that taught occultism, magic. So if you're in the United States, in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can actually go to the Rosicrucian Museum in San Jose, which I would recommend if, for the very least, checking out just their lovely gardens. Yeah. Okay, the water. A lot of fire and water symbolism in this movie. The waters typically represent the waters of the deep, the unknown, mystery, the cosmos, chaos, actually, the descent into chaos or cosmic energy, and the underworld in the film is actually largely water. So yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly what Miyazaki's doing. This is the power of soul, of spirit. In the biblical tradition, water is used in baptism as a sort of renewal of the soul through spirit, kind of a cleansing, a reemergence of renewed magical power. We also, I want to take a moment to note, in the water, in the underworld, we see the shade boatmen, right? These shades, that the buyers that come to barter for Kiriko's fish, bid, wear garb that's more traditionally Filipino or Taiwanese or maybe Okinawan at the most. This is not like traditional Japanese fishermen's garb that they're wearing, which on the one hand kind of is, yeah, I mean, it does harken to the fact that in one way, in more island nations, the waters are in fact what connect us all, truly. But I think it's also, a nod toward how Miyazaki continues pulling in different indigenous, esoteric, social, religious, architectural, all these different traditions which made up modern Japan at that time. And yes, the Philippines would have been part of Imperial Japan at the time of when the movie took place. So there's also that. The Warawara. The Warawara, we are told, are the unborn souls. So in a sense, they represent humanity, actually humanity in the underworld, or the magical soul energy that crosses from the lower world into the material world, that which crosses a different threshold. And I don't know, these guys are great. Warawara is kind of youth Japanese slang for laughing. So they're literally just laughing, and babies laugh, but I don't know. I see these guys becoming more popular than the kodama, honestly. They're fun. Okay, Lady Himi. Lady Himi is the traditional Miki Otori-sama, or Fire Shrine Maiden, legendary kind of spiritual religious figure from pre-Shinto into Shinto tradition in Japan. What you see is what you get here. They harness the power of fire. Check out Inuyasha Kikyo, and that is your traditional Fire Shrine Maiden. Not going to go deep into this one because it's quite a prolific symbol. What I think is notable here is that as an attendant of Lady Himi and Natsuko in the real world, Kiriko also harnesses the power of fire with her fire switch in the magical world also. So she does bear some of the Fire Maiden's power in a way. A little hint toward who Kiriko is. And I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about like fire's protective versus its destructive force. it holds a purification power in Shinto also. I don't know. I think for The Boy and the Heron, it would be better to discuss fire versus water. This video is getting long. That's an entirely different video. Anyway. All right, next up we have Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu is what Mahito says in the subbed version as he bids goodbye to the noble pelican. As the pelican dies, it's translated, even in the subbed version, to rest in peace. In Japan, Namu Amida Butsu is used, the phrase similarly as rest in peace is used for those who've passed in the West, but it does not mean the same thing. Namu Amida Butsu instead is a prayer to the Amida Buddha, who is the head Buddha of what's referred to as the Pure Land in Buddhism. And the Pure Land is another world that Buddhists can go to after death and eternally study Buddhism and become more enlightening beings. So to pray Namu Amida Butsu over the pelican is actually explicitly a wish from Mahito for the pelican to travel to another world, like Mahito's actually in, which is interesting to me. Now, we have birds. A lot of birds in this movie, which is great. Who doesn't love birds? Obviously, Miyazaki must love birds. We're given at the end of the film, effectively, knowledge that these are living elements brought into this magical world in order to help beautify and help perfect it. It speaks to Miyazaki's love for birds and flight. Yes, there are birds like in Spirited Away, there's the Otori-sama. I mean, every single one of Miyazaki's Ghibli's films features birds and flight in some way. I mean, Porco Rosso and The Wind Rises are explicitly about manned flight. That said, I believe the pelicans specifically are a reference to sort of the more Buddhist like desires of man, just the insatiable desire of man, something that's never going to end, something that's never going to change. While we're told more explicitly that the parakeets, through the parakeet, come to represent more of the malice of man, the imperialistic nationalist fervor, even that was sweeping Japan at the time, that that energy can diffuse through the dead and permeate and come to saturate the underworld, and it's given life through the parakeets, with their consumptive, destructive, negotiating, militaristic, dynastic laws that they seem to follow. So lastly, we're gonna round this out on the two charms and the ending. The two charms, we get this awesome scene between the Heron and Mahito, their last interaction, where he's like, "Yeah, show me what you've got," and he brings out the two charms. Mahito declined all 13 of Grandfather's charms. He also declined the 13 charms that were sort of unadulterated by Grandfather. Instead, he just picked up his own charm from that realm, and also kept the Kiriko charm that Kiriko gave him. It's notable here that the Heron tells him, I'm not sure if you guys caught this, that it's the Kiriko charm that has power, but the actual seemingly magically powerful stone charm is relatively powerless. I think this is a message from Miyazaki. There's power in people. Stone, in our world, powerless. But you have memory of someone who helped you, there's real magical power in that. Which is so heartwarming, right? And then the ending, the Heron tells him, forget about this, or you probably will forget, or you should forget. And in fact, I think the ending's perfect, because when we see Mahito close that door, it tells us everything we need to know. He's done the work. He's taken Heron's advice and forgotten about this journey. He doesn't bat a single eye. I don't know. I know when I'm leaving places or moving on or changing life, I get a little sentimental. Mahito, not at all. Mahito is ready to move fully on with his life, move back into the real world, which is just awesome. So if you've watched this video up to this point, I am assuming that you've seen the movie. And if you haven't, go see it. It's one of the best experiences in the cinema that I've had in the last 5 or 10 years, honestly. And it's just the perfect culmination of Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli's work. And just, yeah, I mean, a movie so full of meaning and power. I loved it. I'm going to go continue seeing it again and again with the English voice cast. I know I'm going to check it out again. So that's all I have for you today. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.